Are you a real villain?
Well, technically, nah.
Have you ever caught a good guy, like a real superhero?
Nah.
Have you ever tried a disguise?
Nah.
All right. I can see that I will have to teach you how to be villains. Now listen closely. Here's a little lesson in history.
Korea had been under Japanese occupation for decades, but at the end of World War II, the USA and Russia agreed to divide Korea along the 38th parallel and unite the nation after 5 years. But many Koreans wanted independence immediately, and in the south, the Americans had to deal with numerous strikes and protests. So they banned the Provisional People's Republic and held elections in 1948, and despite boycotts and terrorism, Syngman Rhee, a pro-American politician, was elected. But he, as part of the Jeju Uprising, killed thousands and imprisoned many more, yet many communist guerrillas remained. Meanwhile, in the north, the Soviets installed Kim Il-sung as leader before withdrawing in 1948. Kim had spent the war in China and was relatively unknown, but quickly began to create a cult of personality. He also sent aid to the Chinese communists who were fighting the nationalists in the Chinese Civil War. And in return, when Mao took over China, he promised to support Kim in any war. Then, in 1949, after the Soviet Union tested their first atomic bomb, Kim and Mao received limited backing from Stalin. Stalin sent advisors and weapons to North Korea while Kim readied his armies. Then, on the 25th of June 1950, after numerous skirmishes along the border, North Korea invaded the south. The South Koreans lacked the weaponry and numbers, so they could not stop their advance, despite blowing up bridges with refugees on. So within just a couple of days, Rhee had fled and Seoul was captured. But the USSR was boycotting UN meetings at the time because Communist China didn't have a permanent seat on the Security Council, so the UN passed Resolution 83. This granted South Korea military assistance, and the Americans, who feared not intervening would encourage communist nations to use military force elsewhere, sent thousands of troops. But they were under-equipped initially due to post-war spending cuts and driven back to Busan. Meanwhile, the Americans angered the Chinese by sending ships to defend the Republic of China in Taiwan. So the Chinese, now expecting to enter the war, got the Soviets to promise air support. But in Busan, the Americans were receiving thousands of reinforcements and started driving north from the Busan perimeter in early September. And on the 15th, General MacArthur sent troops to capture Incheon via amphibious landing after heavy bombardment had all but destroyed the city. On the 25th, Seoul was retaken and UN troops arrived at the 38th parallel a couple days later. Although China threatened to intervene if they crossed the parallel, the UN gave MacArthur permission to do so, and he sent his troops north. The North Koreans had taken heavy casualties during their retreat, and they lost Pyongyang on October the 19th. But hundreds of thousands of Chinese soldiers had made it to the border almost undetected, then invaded the north and drove the UN back to the Chonchan River. But they decided to wait in defensive positions for a UN counterattack. This attack came on the 25th of November and ended in failure, so the UN ordered a full retreat. And it was during this retreat that the Turkish brigade famously helped defend the US 8th Army. In Hungnam, ships helped evacuate soldiers before razing the city, while the rest of the army made it back to the 38th parallel by mid-December. Another Chinese assault was launched the following January, and by attacking at night and using trumpets and gongs to disorientate the UN troops, they successfully recaptured Seoul on the 4th. But they had few supplies and poor transportation, and the UN was able to reclaim land up to the Han River by early February. Plus, in mid-February, despite being outnumbered by 15-1, the UN troops fought back another Chinese counterattack. So the UN then countered with Operation Killer, intending to kill as many Chinese as they could, and then Operation Ripper recaptured Seoul in mid-March. General MacArthur, who had previously threatened to use nukes, was sacked because he was blamed for escalating the war. And Matthew Ridgway, who had revitalized the 8th Army, took over as Supreme Commander. He began to drop troops behind enemy lines in order to encircle them, but had to quickly deal with another Chinese offensive. Although the Chinese were now equipped with more Soviet supply trucks and planes, their advance was halted at the battles of Imjin River and Kapyong in late April. And the UN managed to capitalize on this by driving the Chinese back to the 38th parallel once again. But this time they halted on the parallel and a stalemate ensued. The fighting, however, continued over the next 2 years, but it remained small. The UN lacked the desire to push north, and the Chinese lacked the resources to push south. So after 2 years of sporadic fighting, the Indians helped negotiate an armistice in July 1953. Prisoners were exchanged and a demilitarized zone was created near the 38th parallel. Despite over 2 million casualties, the only major territorial change was Kaesong became part of North Korea. But no peace treaty was signed and the DMZ remained heavily guarded. North Korea tried to restart the war in the 1970s after communist forces won in Vietnam, but they had no backing from China. So Kim tried to fight via unconventional means like digging tunnels to Seoul and attempted assassinations. But this failed and of course Korea remains divided.